Vladimir Putin is facing a growing challenge, but it may not be the one many observers expect. While international attention remains fixed on Ukraine, another source of instability is emerging from Russia's North Caucasus, a region that has long represented one of the Kremlin's most sensitive fault lines. At the center of that uncertainty stands Chechnya, a republic that has shaped Putin's political career from the very beginning. Chechnya has never been just another federal region. It was here that Putin forged his reputation as a decisive leader, projected the image of strength that would define his presidency, and secured Moscow's authority through a local strongman entrusted with maintaining control. That man is Ramzan Kadyrov. For more than 2 decades, Kadyrov has ruled Chechnya with near absolute authority. As the Kremlin's closest ally in the North Caucasus, he has served both as Putin's most reliable regional partner and as the figure responsible for keeping one of Russia's most volatile territories firmly under Moscow's influence. Today, however, that carefully managed system appears to be under increasing strain. Reports emerging from intelligence circles, together with growing political activity inside Chechnya, suggest that Kadyrov's health has deteriorated significantly. A number of independent sources claim he is suffering from a serious and potentially terminal illness. What gives those reports greater credibility is not simply the speculation itself, but Kadyrov's own political behavior. An unusually rapid succession process now appears to be underway. If Kadyrov is no longer able to govern, the consequences would extend far beyond Chechnya. The power vacuum left behind could present one of the most serious internal security challenges Russia has faced in years. To understand why, it is necessary to examine how Kadyrov came to power. The origins of today's political system lie in the 2 Chechen wars. The first conflict, fought between 1994 and 1996, ended in a major setback for Moscow. Russian forces failed to re-establish control, allowing Chechnya to function with de facto independence. The defeat severely damaged President Boris Yeltsin's standing and exposed the weakness of the Russian state. For Vladimir Putin, who became prime minister in 1999, the renewed conflict offered both a political risk and an extraordinary opportunity. Launching the Second Chechen War with uncompromising rhetoric against separatist militants, Putin presented himself as the leader capable of restoring order where previous governments had failed. Public support increased rapidly, and the campaign became the foundation upon which his image as a strong national leader was built. Yet military force alone did not secure victory. A crucial figure was Akhmat Kadyrov. During the First War, Akhmat had fought against Russian forces alongside Chechen separatists. In the second conflict, however, he dramatically changed sides. His intimate knowledge of the separatist movement, its commanders, and internal rivalries proved invaluable to Moscow. Using those connections, he persuaded some commanders to defect, isolated others, and helped dismantle organized resistance from within. It was a political and military turning point that Russia could not easily have achieved without local support. In return, the Kadyrov family received extraordinary privileges. Chechnya was granted a remarkable degree of internal autonomy. Billions of rubles in federal funding flowed into the republic each year, while the Kadyrov clan received broad security guarantees and significant freedom to govern with minimal interference from Moscow. Everything changed in 2004. Akhmat Kadyrov was killed in an assassination, prompting the Kremlin to move quickly. With Putin's full backing, his son Ramzan Kadyrov gradually assumed control and inherited the political structure his father had established. Ramzan did not simply preserve that system, he strengthened it. Over the following 22 years, he consolidated power by eliminating rival clans, suppressing political opposition, and establishing one of the most tightly controlled regional administrations in the Russian Federation. Human rights organizations and independent observers have repeatedly accused his government of widespread repression. Large numbers of Chechens left the republic over the years, creating a substantial diaspora across Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere. Despite persistent criticism, the Kremlin continued to support Kadyrov. For Putin, stability in Chechnya outweighed every other consideration. As long as Kadyrov maintained order, Moscow was prepared to overlook allegations surrounding his methods. In return, Kadyrov demonstrated unwavering political loyalty and provided forces from the Akhmat units to support Russian military operations in Ukraine. That relationship has now created a new strategic vulnerability. The Kremlin's reliance on Kadyrov means that any uncertainty surrounding his future immediately becomes a problem for Moscow itself. Although only 49 years old, Kadyrov has faced recurring questions about his health for several years. By late 2025 and early 2026, those concerns had intensified considerably. Several independent reports claim he has suffered from pancreatic necrosis since 2019, although these allegations have never been officially confirmed. According to multiple sources, his condition worsened dramatically in December 2025, when he was reportedly transferred to a Moscow hospital for emergency treatment, including dialysis associated with kidney failure. One detail attracted particular attention. Reports suggested members of his extended family were urgently summoned to be at his side. Within Chechen tradition, such gatherings are widely regarded as more than routine family visits. They are often interpreted as preparation for a final farewell, and can signal that an important transition is approaching. Kadyrov has consistently rejected claims that he is seriously ill. Nevertheless, a noticeable pattern has emerged. He frequently disappears from public view for extended periods before returning with carefully staged fitness videos and public appearances seemingly intended to demonstrate his physical condition. After a short time, however, those disappearances tend to recur. For many analysts, that cycle has only fueled further speculation. A leader in robust health rarely feels compelled to repeatedly prove it. Perhaps even more significant is the political activity now taking place behind the scenes. Kadyrov appears to be preparing for succession. In Chechnya, where clan loyalties and long-standing rivalries remain deeply influential, openly discussing succession carries considerable political risk. Declaring an heir can easily be interpreted as a sign that a leader's authority is weakening, encouraging competitors to position themselves for the future. Historically, leaders in similarly unstable environments have often delayed naming successors until the final possible moment, precisely to avoid triggering internal power struggles. If Kadyrov has decided to move ahead despite those risks, it may indicate that the pressures surrounding his health are more serious than the Kremlin has publicly acknowledged. The clearest indication of that succession strategy can be seen within Kadyrov's own family. Over recent years, several of his children have been elevated into increasingly prominent political and security positions at remarkable speed. For many observers, the pace of these appointments suggests preparation rather than coincidence. Ramzan Kadyrov has 12 biological children, and at least 3 have already been introduced into positions of influence. His third son, Adam Kadyrov, is only 18 years old, yet already heads the Presidential Security Service. His rise has been especially controversial. At the age of 15, Adam attracted widespread attention following an incident that generated significant criticism beyond Chechnya. Instead of distancing himself, Kadyrov publicly praised his son, awarding him the title of Hero of the Chechen Republic, together with several state honors. His eldest son, Ahmad Kadyrov Jr., now 20, serves as deputy prime minister. Despite the senior title, some independent commentators, including the newspaper Novaya Gazeta, have questioned whether he possesses the political experience or public presence required to command authority in such a complex environment. There is, however, a legal obstacle. Under Chechnya's constitution, the presidency can only be held by someone aged 30 or above. None of Kadyrov's sons currently meet that requirement, making an immediate dynastic succession impossible. That is why another layer of planning appears to be taking shape. Alongside his sons, Kadyrov has positioned several trusted allies who could potentially serve as interim leaders until the next generation becomes constitutionally eligible. The first and perhaps most influential figure is Adam Delimkhanov. Kadyrov has repeatedly described Delimkhanov as being closer than a brother, and publicly identified him years ago as someone capable of succeeding him. Officially, Delimkhanov serves as a deputy in Russia's State Duma, but his influence extends well beyond parliamentary politics. He maintains extensive connections throughout the Chechen diaspora, with networks reaching the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Jordan, and several European countries. Those relationships provide him with considerable political leverage beyond Chechnya itself. Another prominent figure is Magomed Daudov, widely known by the nickname Lord. His political journey mirrors the broader history of Chechnya. During the Second Chechen War, Daudov initially fought alongside separatist forces before being captured and eventually switching allegiance to the Kadyrov camp. Since then, he has become one of the most powerful figures inside the republic, overseeing much of Chechnya's internal security apparatus and playing a central role in maintaining political control. His appointment as prime minister in 2024 attracted particular attention because, under the republic's constitutional arrangements, he would automatically assume executive authority should Kadyrov become unable to perform his duties. The succession strategy extends beyond political appointments. Family alliances are also being strengthened through carefully arranged marriages. In the summer of 2025, Adam Kadyrov married a close relative of Adam Delimkhanov, further reinforcing the relationship between two of Chechnya's most influential families. The marriage carried clear political symbolism, highlighted by a personal congratulatory message from President Putin himself. Only months later, however, another unexpected development followed. In January 2026, Adam Kadyrov was reportedly involved in a serious high-speed road accident in Grozny. According to several reports, he sustained significant injuries and was flown to Moscow for treatment by air ambulance. Whether related or entirely coincidental, the incident served as another reminder of how uncertain the succession picture has become. Behind these political maneuvers lies an equally important question of military power. Ramzan Kadyrov commands the Akhmat forces, a powerful armed formation estimated to number between 18,000 and 25,000 personnel. Officially, these units operate within Russia's National Guard. In practice, however, they have long been regarded as personally loyal to Kadyrov, rather than to federal institutions in Moscow. Their responsibilities extend far beyond conventional military duties. They provide internal security across Chechnya, protect strategic infrastructure, safeguard the Kadyrov leadership, and have also participated extensively in Russia's military campaign in Ukraine. At the same time, several independent reports suggest Kadyrov has quietly explored security guarantees for his family through contacts with governments in the Middle East, allegedly without the Kremlin's full knowledge. If accurate, those reports would indicate that Kadyrov has sought reassurance from several directions simultaneously, from Moscow, from his own political network, and from foreign partners. Such behavior would hardly reflect confidence. Instead, it would suggest growing uncertainty about the future. This brings us to perhaps the most important question of all. If Ramzan Kadyrov were suddenly removed from the political scene, who would command approximately 25,000 heavily armed and highly organized fighters? That question remains unanswered. The Akhmat structure includes a wide range of formations, among them Omon Akhmat Special Units, the 141st and 249th Battalions attached to the 46th Brigade, Sober Akhmat Elite Forces, and the 78th Motorized Rifle Regiment established after 2022. Together, these forces perform multiple roles. They secure Chechnya's vital infrastructure, protect key government sites, guard the village where the Kadyrov family originated, and continue to operate on the Ukrainian battlefield. Internationally, many became known through heavily publicized social media videos, leading critics to label them the TikTok warriors. Yet despite that reputation, elements of these formations have also participated in genuine frontline combat operations. The difficulty lies in what happens after Kadyrov. Would these fighters transfer their loyalty to one of his sons? Would they follow Magomed Daudov? Would they accept Adam Delimkhanov? Or would they recognize a new leader appointed directly by the Kremlin? Recent events suggest those loyalties may already be less certain than they appear. According to Ukrainian sources, intelligence services successfully penetrated Akhmat units during operations conducted in early 2026. During the so-called Shaman Battalion operation on the Seversk front, Ukrainian special forces reportedly worked alongside anti-Kremlin Chechen fighters, and an agent operating from within the Akhmat organization itself. That operative allegedly succeeded in placing surveillance equipment inside a command meeting room using an FPV drone, contributing to one of the most damaging operations suffered by Akhmat units since the conflict began. Following the operation, Shaman Battalion Commander Abdul Hakim publicly appealed to Chechen fighters, asking why they continued fighting for Moscow and urging them instead to change sides. Whether symbolic or practical, the message highlighted an uncomfortable reality. Even one of Russia's most tightly controlled security formations may not enjoy absolute internal unity. Similar concerns have emerged elsewhere. Reports from the fighting around Mariupol suggested that Akhmat personnel clashed directly with elements of Russia's regular armed forces, despite technically serving the same military objectives. Other accounts have claimed that some Akhmat units were employed as barrier troops, tasked with preventing retreating Russian soldiers from leaving the battlefield, a role that reportedly damaged relations with regular military personnel. Taken together, these developments point towards growing tension beneath the surface. Should Kadyrov leave the political stage, those unresolved rivalries could become significantly more difficult to contain. And if control over roughly 25,000 armed personnel becomes contested, the consequences would extend well beyond Chechnya itself, potentially affecting both Russia's internal stability and its wider military operations in Ukraine. The Kremlin is clearly aware of the risks surrounding any future transition in Chechnya, yet preparing for that moment has proved almost as complicated as the succession itself. According to a number of independent assessments, there is no unified position inside the Russian leadership over who should eventually replace Ramzan Kadyrov. Different centers of power are believed to favor different candidates, reflecting broader rivalries within the Russian state. Reports suggest that the Federal Security Service, or FSB, has backed one preferred successor, while elements of the presidential administration have promoted another. At the same time, the Kadyrov family continues to advance its own succession strategy. If Kadyrov were to leave office unexpectedly, two political battles could begin simultaneously. The first would involve competition within Moscow over who controls one of Russia's most strategically sensitive regions. The second would unfold inside Chechnya itself, where influential clans would compete for power in an environment shaped by long-standing personal loyalties and rivalries. Analysts argue that Kadyrov's departure could significantly alter the balance of influence among Russia's security institutions. Some assessments suggest that the weakening of Kadyrov's political network would reduce the influence of figures associated with the Russian National Guard, while creating an opportunity for the FSB to expand its authority over one of the country's last semi-autonomous security structures. Evidence that Moscow has been preparing for such a possibility can be found in earlier appointments. In 2023, Dmitry Kochetkov, an official with extensive operational experience in the North Caucasus and previous involvement in operations linked to Kadyrov's structures, was appointed head of the FSB in Chechnya. Many observers interpreted that decision as part of a longer-term effort to strengthen federal influence inside the republic before any future leadership crisis emerged. Whether that strategy would succeed remains another question entirely. For years, Kadyrov systematically reduced the influence of federal security agencies within Chechnya. His own security forces largely operated under separate command arrangements, and reports indicate he resisted allowing the FSB to train his personnel directly, preferring instructors personally trusted by his inner circle. Financial dependence further complicates the picture. Every year, Moscow transfers an estimated $6.5 billion to Chechnya through federal funding programs. Those resources support not only public administration, but also the patronage networks, security structures, and political system that have sustained Kadyrov's authority for more than 2 decades. This leaves the Kremlin facing a difficult dilemma. Reducing financial support risks destabilizing the entire political order. Maintaining that support, however, may simply strengthen whichever faction eventually assumes power. Recent Russian history offers another warning. The Wagner Group rebellion demonstrated how a heavily armed organization operating with significant autonomy could rapidly evolve into a challenge for the Russian state itself. Many analysts believe the potential risks in Chechnya could be even greater. Unlike Wagner, Kadyrov's forces possess deep social, political, and family connections within their own republic. Those local roots make them far more resilient than an ordinary private military formation. Several research organizations have therefore argued that, unless the Kremlin manages a rapid and carefully controlled transition, unrest inside Chechnya cannot be ruled out. Long-suppressed opposition groups could view any leadership vacuum as an opportunity to re-emerge after years of political repression. Yet the consequences would not stop at Chechnya's borders. The Russian Federation consists of 21 ethnic republics, each with its own language, history, and regional identity. Since coming to power, Vladimir Putin has steadily centralized authority. Direct elections for many regional leaders were abolished. Federal law increasingly overrode local autonomy, and, in 2017, the special power-sharing agreement that had granted Tatarstan unique constitutional privileges was allowed to expire. Chechnya remained the notable exception. The extraordinary freedoms and political autonomy granted to Kadyrov were never extended to other republics. That difference has long generated quiet resentment among regional elites. If Chechnya's political model were to collapse, or if the republic appeared capable of extracting greater independence from Moscow, leaders elsewhere could begin asking why similar arrangements should not apply to them. This is why developments in Chechnya carry significance far beyond the republic itself. The issue is not simply regional stability. It concerns the cohesion of the Russian Federation. Recent events elsewhere in the North Caucasus illustrate the wider challenge. In Dagestan, during October 2023, large crowds stormed Makhachkala Airport, exposing weaknesses in local security and demonstrating how quickly unrest can spread despite Moscow's authority. Neighboring Ingushetia has also experienced periodic separatist sentiment, even if those movements have been contained. The region occupies a strategically vital position bordering Georgia, Azerbaijan, and close to both Turkey and Iran. Important transport corridors and energy infrastructure, including routes linked to the Baku-Novorossiysk pipeline, pass through the wider North Caucasus. Instability in Chechnya therefore raises concerns extending well beyond regional politics. It has implications for Russia's southern frontier, energy security, and overall federal integrity. The broader pattern is not confined solely to Russia's ethnic republics. Belarus offers another example of a political system built around a long-serving leader whose survival has depended heavily upon Kremlin support. Although geographically distant and constitutionally independent from Russia, Belarus has followed a similar political trajectory. Alexander Lukashenko has remained in power for more than 3 decades. During the mass protests of 2020, his government survived in large part because of Moscow's political backing, financial assistance, and the possibility of direct Russian security support. Since then, hundreds of thousands of Belarusians have left the country, while opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has continued her political activities from exile with considerable backing from Western governments. Belarus has become increasingly dependent upon Russia. Should the Kremlin appear unable to maintain stability in Chechnya, opposition movements elsewhere, including in Belarus, could interpret that as evidence that Moscow's wider system of regional influence is beginning to weaken. The common thread linking Kadyrov and Lukashenko is their reliance upon Putin. Both political systems ultimately depend upon continued financial, military, and political support from Moscow. If Russia were forced to manage serious instability in multiple regions while simultaneously sustaining military operations in Ukraine, the pressure on Kremlin resources would inevitably increase. That is precisely why many analysts are paying such close attention to developments inside Chechnya. When Ukraine is added to this picture, the strategic implications become even more significant. In Kyiv, a Chechen government in exile continues to operate, while several Chechen volunteer battalions are actively fighting alongside Ukrainian forces against Russia. Among the best known is the Shaman Battalion, a unit that has reportedly inflicted some of the heaviest losses suffered by Akhmat forces during the conflict. For many of these fighters, Ukraine's struggle is viewed as inseparable from their own long-standing campaign against Russian rule. That political relationship was reinforced in 2022 when Ukraine's parliament formally recognized the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria as a territory under temporary Russian occupation. Although largely symbolic in practical terms, the decision established an important political and legal framework. Should a leadership vacuum emerge in Chechnya following Ramzan Kadyrov's departure, Ukraine would have both political motivation and existing relationships through which it could increase support for Chechen anti-Kremlin movements. From Kyiv's perspective, encouraging instability inside Russia would inevitably reduce pressure along the Ukrainian front. With an established government in exile, experienced Chechen volunteer units already fighting on Ukraine's side, and formal parliamentary recognition in place, much of the political infrastructure for such cooperation already exists. History also provides important context. Resistance to Russian rule in Chechnya stretches back centuries. From the Caucasian Wars of the 19th century through the collapse of the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union, periods of upheaval in Moscow have repeatedly coincided with renewed Chechen efforts to expand their autonomy or pursue independence. The historical pattern is difficult to ignore. When central authority has been strong, organized resistance has generally been contained. When the Russian state has faced moments of weakness or transition, opportunities for renewed separatist activity have tended to emerge. Some analysts argue that today's circumstances contain elements of both. Russia remains heavily committed to military operations in Ukraine. At the same time, uncertainty surrounding Kadyrov's health and the absence of a universally accepted successor have introduced new political risks inside Chechnya. Whether these developments ultimately reinforce one another remains uncertain, but they are unfolding simultaneously. That said, it is important not to overstate the situation. The Kremlin still possesses substantial tools with which it could manage a controlled transition. The first is constitutional continuity. By appointing Magomed Daudov as prime minister, an established legal mechanism already exists through which executive authority could pass immediately should Kadyrov become unable to perform his duties. At least on paper, this reduces the likelihood of an immediate institutional vacuum. The second instrument is financial leverage. Each year, Moscow transfers billions of dollars into Chechnya. Those funds underpin the republic's administrative structures, patronage networks, and security institutions. Regardless of who eventually assumes power, continued access to those resources will remain essential. In practical terms, whoever controls the flow of federal funding retains considerable influence over political loyalty within the republic. There is another important factor. After more than 2 decades without another major war on Chechen territory, many ordinary residents may have little appetite for renewed armed conflict. Political uncertainty does not automatically translate into separatism or civil war. Indeed, many analysts believe more likely outcomes include negotiations between rival clans, a carefully managed transition supervised by Moscow, or an informal regency preserving the Kadyrov family's influence, while another figure governs on its behalf. A return to full-scale conflict remains only one of several possible scenarios, and not necessarily the most probable. Even so, each of those reassuring arguments comes with important limitations. A constitutional succession may establish legal authority, but it cannot guarantee the loyalty of thousands of armed personnel accustomed to following Ramzan Kadyrov personally. Financial incentives remain influential, yet history repeatedly shows that political patronage alone cannot always prevent violent struggles between competing factions. Likewise, while much of Chechen society may wish to avoid another conflict, broader public opinion does not necessarily restrain rival clans driven by long-standing grievances or ambitions. Ultimately, the Kremlin may well be capable of managing this transition. The challenge lies elsewhere. The political attention, financial resources, and security assets required to maintain stability in Chechnya are the very same resources already being stretched by Russia's continuing war in Ukraine. That overlap creates a strategic contradiction the Kremlin cannot easily escape. For President Putin, this may prove to be one of the most complex domestic security challenges of his presidency. Not because a crisis is inevitable, but because the number of variables is increasing while the room for political maneuver is becoming steadily narrower. The coming months are therefore likely to be watched closely, not only for developments surrounding Ramzan Kadyrov's health, but for what those developments may reveal about the resilience of Russia's broader system of regional control. As always, the situation continues to evolve, and careful analysis will matter far more than speculation. If you found this report informative, share your perspective in the comments below. Do you believe the Kremlin can maintain long-term stability in Chechnya after Kadyrov, or could this become a far wider challenge for Russia? Subscribe to Geo Network and join us for our next in-depth analysis as we continue following the stories shaping global politics.